Grace McAllister's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she pressed her 3 daughters against her chest, watching Victor Crane's men ride toward her farmhouse through the falling snow. 60 days. That's all she had left before the banker would take everything: her land, her home, her children's future. And now, he was coming to make his offer one final time: marry him or lose it all. If you want to know how this desperate mother fights back, subscribe to our channel and stay until the end. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The letter crumpled in Grace McAllister's fist as she stood in her kitchen, the words burning behind her eyes like hot coals. Final notice: 60 days. Full payment or forfeiture of property. Mama. Grace shoved the letter into her apron pocket and turned to face her eldest daughter. Lily stood in the doorway, her gray eyes, too old for 12 years, already reading the tension in her mother's shoulders. It's nothing, sweetheart. Just some business from town. It's from the bank again, isn't it? Lily stepped closer, her voice dropping. I saw Mr. Crane's seal on the envelope. Grace reached out and smoothed her daughter's honey-colored hair so like her own. You're too sharp for your own good, Lily McAllister. Sharp enough to know we're in trouble. Before Grace could respond, the back door burst open, and 8-year-old Josie tumbled in with a blast of cold air and a shower of snowflakes. Her brown eyes were wild with excitement, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. Mama, there's a man collapsed by the fence line. He fell right off his horse. Grace's heart lurched. What? Where? By the north pasture. Biscuit found him first. Josie grabbed her mother's hand, tugging urgently. He ain't moving, Mama. I think he might be dead. Josie, stay here with your sisters. Lily, watch Emma. But Mama. Now Lily. Grace grabbed Samuel's old coat from the hook by the door, the one that still smelled faintly of him, and ran out into the bitter Wyoming winter. The snow was already ankle-deep and falling harder by the minute. Old-timers in Bitter Creek had been warning about this storm for days, saying it would be the worst in 20 years. She found him exactly where Josie had said, crumpled against the fence post, like a broken puppet. A tall man, broad-shouldered, his dark hair matted with snow, and what looked sickeningly like blood. His horse stood nearby, steam rising from its heaving flanks. Grace dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her fingers to his throat. A pulse. Weak, but there. Mister, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, brown deep as coffee and filled with pain. He tried to speak, but only a groan escaped. Don't try to talk. I'm going to get you inside. Can you stand if I help you? He managed a slight nod, and Grace wedged herself under his arm, staggering under his weight as she hauled him upright. He was heavy, solid muscle and bone, and she nearly fell twice before they reached the house. Lily, open the door. Her daughter's face went pale when she saw the stranger, but she obeyed instantly, holding the door wide, as Grace half-carried, half-dragged the man inside. Clear the table, Grace ordered, her voice sharp with urgency. Josie, get blankets from the chest. Lily, heat water on the stove. Little Emma stood frozen by the fireplace, her blue eyes wide as saucers, clutching her rag doll against her chest. Is the man going to die, Mama? Not if I can help it, baby. Now go sit by the fire and stay warm. They lowered the stranger onto the cleared kitchen table, and Grace finally got a good look at his injuries. A gash along his hairline, still bleeding sluggishly. His left leg was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. His leg's broken, she muttered, mostly to herself. And he's half frozen. The man's eyes opened again, more focused this time. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his grip desperate. My horse, he rasped. Don't let them take my horse. Nobody's taking anything, mister. You're safe here. His grip loosened, and his eyes rolled back as he lost consciousness again. For the next hour, Grace worked with grim determination. She'd helped Doc Whitfield enough times to know the basics of setting a bone, though she'd never done it alone. Lily held the man's shoulders, while Grace pulled and twisted the sickening crunch of bone sliding back into place, making Josie run from the room. She splinted the leg with barrel staves, and torn petticoats stitched the head wound with thread from her sewing basket, and covered him with every blanket they could spare. Through it all, the stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering words that made no sense. "Margaret! I'm sorry. Couldn't save." "Who's Margaret?" Josie whispered from the doorway, her earlier fear replaced by curiosity. "That's none of our business," Grace said firmly. "Now come help me move him to the spare room." It took all four of them, even little Emma pushing with her small hands, to get the stranger onto the narrow bed in what had been Samuel's office. Grace tucked the blankets around him, placed a cool cloth on his forehead, and stepped back to assess her work. He'd live. Probably, if fever didn't set in. "Mama," Lily said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "Who is he?" Grace looked down at the unconscious stranger, the hard planes of his face, the small scar on his right hand, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. A man past his youth, marked by years of hard living. "I don't know, sweetheart, but right now, he's our responsibility." What if he's dangerous? Grace thought of the desperation in his eyes, the way he'd begged her to protect his horse. He's just a man who needs help. That's all that matters for now. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows and piling snow against the doors. By evening, they were well and truly snowed in. Grace checked on the stranger every hour, forcing water between his cracked lips, changing the cloth on his forehead when fever began to climb. It was past midnight when he finally woke properly. Grace was dozing in the chair beside his bed, a rifle across her lap just in case, when his voice pulled her from restless dreams. "Where am I?" She sat up immediately, alert. "McAllister Farm, about 10 miles north of Bitter Creek. I'm Grace McAllister." The man tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a groan, his face going gray. "My leg. Broken. I said it as best I could, but you'll need to stay off it for weeks, maybe longer." He closed his eyes, processing this. When he opened them again, they were clearer, more focused. "Thank you, ma'am, for saving my life. My daughter found you. You should thank her." "I will." He paused, his gaze moving around the small room. "You said McAllister Farm. You alone out here?" Grace's hand tightened on the rifle. "My husband passed 8 months ago, but I managed just fine." "I meant no offense, ma'am." His voice was gentle, surprisingly so for such a rough-looking man. "I was just thinking, a woman alone with a farm in a storm like this, that's hard." "I'm not alone. I have my daughters." "How many?" "3. Lily's 12, Josie's 8, and Emma's 4. Something flickered across his face, pain that had nothing to do with his injuries. "That's a blessing, ma'am. Children are a blessing." Grace studied him in the lamplight. "You have children, Mr. Thornton. Caleb Thornton." He was quiet for a long moment. "Had a son, once. He'd be 9 now if he'd lived." The grief in those few words was raw, unmistakable. Grace recognized it. She wore the same grief herself, though she'd learned to carry it more quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Thornton." "And I for yours, ma'am." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind screaming outside. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "I was headed to Bitter Creek looking for work. Winter work, anything to get me through till spring." He laughed bitterly. "Reckon I found it, though not the way I planned." "What kind of work?" "Horses, mostly. I train them, break them, can do carpentry too when there's need." He shifted slightly, wincing. "Though I won't be much use to anyone with this leg." Grace thought of the barn roof that needed patching, the fence posts that Samuel had never finished replacing, the horses that were too wild for her to handle alone. She thought of the letter in her apron pocket, the 60 days ticking away like a death sentence. "Rest now, Mr. Thornton. We'll talk more in the morning." But she didn't sleep. She sat in that chair until dawn, rifle across her lap, watching the stranger breathe and wondering if his arrival was a curse or a blessing in disguise. 3 days passed before Caleb could stay awake for more than an hour at a time. 3 days of Grace tending to him like she tended to everything else on the farm, with quiet efficiency and minimal sentiment. On the fourth morning, she came in to find him sitting up, his splinted legs stretched out before him, attempting to feed himself the porridge she'd left. "You should have called for help," she said, taking the bowl from his shaking hands. "I've been enough trouble already, ma'am." But he accepted the spoon she offered, his pride clearly at war with his weakness. "Your girls have been checking on me, the little one especially." "Emma." Grace couldn't help but smile. "She's taken quite a shine to you. Calls you the hurt cowboy." Caleb's mouth twitched. "That's apt enough." The older two are more cautious, especially Josie. The one with the brown eyes. She looks at me like I might steal the silver. She loved her father very much. She's protective of this family. Caleb nodded slowly. "She should be. World ain't kind to those who let their guard down." Grace set the empty bowl aside and took a breath. She'd been rehearsing this conversation for 3 days, weighing the risks against the desperation. "Mr. Thornton, I have a proposition for you." He looked up sharply. "Ma'am, you need a place to heal. I need help running this farm." She met his eyes directly. "I can't pay you wages, not right now, but I can offer room board and a share of the spring profits, if we make any." Caleb was silent for a long moment. "You don't know anything about me, Mrs. McAllister. I know you're hurt and alone. I know you asked me to protect your horse before you passed out, which tells me you're a man who cares about the right things." She paused. "And I know that without help, I'm going to lose this farm in 60 days. "Lose it how?" Grace pulled the letter from her pocket. She'd been carrying it like a talisman, a reminder of the sword hanging over her head. "My husband borrowed money from the bank to expand the herd. We were doing well until he got sick. After he passed, I fell behind on payments. Now Victor Crane, he owns the bank, he's calling in the full loan." Caleb took the letter, his eyes scanning the words. 60 days to pay in full or forfeiture. That's harsh terms. Mr. Crane isn't known for his mercy. What's the total owed? $800. Caleb let out a low whistle. That's a fortune. It's everything. Grace's voice cracked slightly, and she hated herself for it. This farm is all my girls have, all I have left of Samuel, and Crane knows it. He's been circling like a vulture since the funeral. What do you mean circling? Grace hesitated. This was the part she hadn't told anyone, not even Lily, though her sharp-eyed daughter probably suspected. Mr. Crane has made it clear that there's another way to settle the debt. Caleb's expression hardened. What way? Marriage. The word tasted like ash. He wants me to marry him. Says he'll forgive the whole loan, take care of me, and the girls give us the life we deserve. And if you refuse, he takes the farm, the livestock, everything. And without land or money, I'll lose my daughters too. The court will say I can't provide for them. Grace's hands were shaking now. So you see, Mr. Thornton, I'm not offering you a job out of charity. I'm asking for your help because I'm desperate. Caleb was quiet for so long that Grace thought he might refuse. Then he shifted his broken leg, grimacing, and met her eyes. This Crane, what kind of man is he? The kind who smiles while he's robbing you. The kind who owns half the town and wants to own the rest. The kind who... She stopped, pressing her lips together. The kind who... What, ma'am? The kind who might have had something to do with my husband getting sick in the first place. Caleb's eyes sharpened. You think he poisoned your husband? I can't prove anything. But Samuel was healthy as a horse until he started meeting with Crane about the loan terms. Then suddenly he's coughing blood, can't get out of bed. Grace's voice was bitter. Doc Whitfield said it was consumption, but Samuel never had a weak day in his life before those meetings. The fire crackled in the silence between them. Outside, the storm had finally broken, leaving a world buried in white. I ain't a hero, Mrs. McAllister, Caleb said finally. I've done things I ain't proud of. Seen things that still wake me up at night. And I've got my own demons chasing me. I'm not asking for a hero. I'm asking for a hired hand who's willing to work hard and help me save my home. Caleb studied her, this woman with honey-colored hair and gray-green eyes like a winter sky standing rigid with pride, even as she asked a stranger for help. He thought of Margaret, of William, of all the people he hadn't been able to save. "All right, Mrs. McAllister, you've got yourself a deal." Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton." "Caleb, if we're going to be working together, might as well drop the formality." "Then you should call me Grace." She extended her hand, and he shook it, his grip strong despite his weakened state. "But just so we're clear, this is a business arrangement, nothing more." "Understood, ma'am." "Grace." He almost smiled. "I ain't looking for anything more either." The days that followed fell into a careful rhythm. Caleb couldn't walk yet, but he could sit. Grace dragged a chair out to the barn, bundled him in blankets, and let him observe her morning routine, feeding the chickens, checking on the cattle, hauling water from the well before it froze solid. "You're doing it wrong," he said on the second morning, watching her struggle with the water bucket. Grace whirled on him. "Excuse me? The bucket. You're lifting with your back. You'll hurt yourself." He mimed the motion from his chair. "Bend your knees, use your legs. The water ain't going nowhere." She stared at him for a moment, then to her own surprise laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. "Are you going to supervise everything I do, Mr. Caleb? Only the things you're doing wrong." From that moment, something shifted between them. Grace still maintained her careful distance, and Caleb never overstepped. But there was an ease now, a partnership forming in the small moments, his advice on the horses, her stories about the farm's history, shared silences that didn't feel awkward. The girls adjusted in their own ways. Emma was instantly smitten, bringing Caleb her drawings and chattering at him endlessly about her doll, her favorite stories, the family of mice she was certain lived in the wall. Caleb listened to every word with grave attention, treating her childish concerns as seriously as any adult matter. "You're good with her," Grace observed one evening, watching Emma demonstrate a clapping game she'd invented. "She reminds me of—" Caleb stopped, his face closing off. "She's a sweet child." Lily remained watchful, but polite, helping with Caleb's meals and changing his bandages with clinical efficiency. She asked careful questions about his past, where he was from, what he'd done, why he was traveling alone in winter. Caleb answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't. Josie was the hardest. She refused to speak to Caleb directly, addressing him only through Grace or her sisters. When he tried to engage her about the dog Biscuit, the scruffy mutt who'd found him in the snow, she turned away as if he hadn't spoken. "She hates me," Caleb said one night after Josie had deliberately left the room when he entered. Grace sighed, settling into her chair by the fire. The girls were in bed, and this had become their time, this quiet hour, when the house was still and they could speak freely. "She doesn't hate you. She's afraid. Of me. Of losing her father again." Grace stared into the flames. Samuel was everything to Josie. They had a special bond. He called her his little shadow. When he died, something in her broke. "I think she believes if she doesn't let anyone new in, she can't be hurt like that again." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Sounds like she's the smartest one in the house." Grace looked at him sharply, but his expression was sincere, not mocking. "I understand that kind of thinking," he continued. "After Margaret and William, I spent 4 years running from anything that felt like connection. Figured if I didn't care about anyone, I couldn't lose anyone." "Did it work?" "No." His voice was rough. "It just meant I was alone with my grief instead of sharing it." The fire popped and sparked. Grace found herself asking the question she'd been avoiding. "What happened to them? Your wife and son?" Caleb's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "Fire. House fire. I was in the barn checking on a mare who was about to foal. didn't see the flames until it was too late. "Caleb," Grace breathed. "I'm so sorry." It was 4 years ago, but some nights I still wake up smelling smoke. He stared at his scarred hands. I tried to go in after them, burned my hands pulling at boards that wouldn't budge. Neighbor had to drag me away when the roof came down. Grace thought of Josie, of her fierce refusal to let anyone close. She thought of her own grief, the way she'd armored herself against the world after Samuel's death. And she thought of this broken man sitting in her house, who had risked his life for strangers because he couldn't save his own family. "You're not to blame," she said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" "My head knows it. The rest of me." He shrugged. "The rest of me ain't so sure." They sat in silence until the fire burned down to embers. When Grace finally rose to check on the girls, she paused at the doorway. "Thank you for telling me, Caleb. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you found your way to our fence line." In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but she heard his voice, rough with emotion, he was trying to hide. "So am I, Grace. So am I, say something." A week after the storm, the roads finally cleared enough for travel. Grace knew she needed to go to town. They were low on supplies, and she had to face Victor Crane eventually. But leaving the girls alone with Caleb still felt like a risk, despite the fragile trust they'd built. "I'll be fine here," Caleb insisted. He was able to hobble around on a makeshift crutch now, though every step clearly pained him. "Lily can help me if I need anything. It's not you I'm worried about." Grace pulled on her gloves, avoiding his eyes. "It's what I'll find in town." "You mean Crane?" "He'll know about you by now. Nothing stays secret in Bitter Creek. He'll have questions." Caleb's expression hardened. "What will you tell him?" "The truth, that I hired a hand to help with the farm, that it's none of his business." Grace's chin lifted. "I may be in debt to that man, but I'm not his property. Not yet." "You won't ever be," Caleb said quietly. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed to thicken with something unspoken. Then Emma came running in, demanding a goodbye kiss, and the moment passed. The ride into Bitter Creek took 2 hours through snow that came up past her horse's knees in places. Grace arrived just before noon, her face numb with cold, but her resolve burning hot. She stopped first at Nettie Hawkins's general store, tying her horse outside the weathered building with its hand-painted sign. Inside, warmth and the smell of coffee wrapped around her like a blessing. "Grace McAllister." Nettie emerged from behind the counter, a plump woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. "I've been worried sick about you out there alone in that storm. Are the girls all right?" "We're fine, Nettie. All of us." Nettie's eyebrows rose at the emphasis. "All of you, I heard a rumor that a stranger rode onto your property just before the blizzard hit." Grace should have known. In Bitter Creek, rumors traveled faster than the wind. "His name is Caleb Thornton. He was injured, broken leg hit his head. I couldn't exactly leave him to freeze." "Of course you couldn't." Nettie's expression was carefully neutral. "And is he still there at your farm?" "He's working for me, helping with the livestock once he's healed." "I see." Nettie began gathering Grace's usual supplies without being asked: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, pork. "And does Victor Crane know about your new employee?" Grace's jaw tightened. "Not yet, but I'm sure he will soon enough." "Oh, honey." Nettie set down the flour sack and came around the counter, taking Grace's cold hands in her warm ones. "You know Crane won't take this well. He's been telling everyone in town that you're going to marry him, that it's already settled." "Then he's a liar as well as a thief." "He's a dangerous man, Grace. You need to be careful." "I know exactly what he is." Grace squeezed Nettie's hands and pulled away. "But I'm not going to let him bully me into marriage. Samuel wouldn't have wanted that, and neither do I." The bell above the door chimed, and Grace felt the temperature in the store drop even further. She didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. "Why, Mrs. McAllister?" Victor Crane's voice was smooth as oil, cultured in a way that set him apart from the ranchers and cowboys of Bitter Creek. "What a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you." Grace turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral. Crane stood in the doorway, immaculately dressed, despite the muddy streets, his silver-topped cane tapping lightly against the floor. Behind him, half visible in the street, loomed the massive figure of Silas Drummond, his foreman. "Mr. Crane? I heard you weathered the storm well." Crane stepped closer, his dark eyes sweeping over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Though I also heard an interesting rumor about a visitor at your farm." "I don't deal in rumors, Mr. Crane." "Then perhaps you can clarify for me." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is it true you're harboring a drifter? A stranger with no references, no background, no one to vouch for him?" "I've hired a hand to help with the farm. His name is Caleb Thornton. He's a horse trainer, and his references are his own business." "Everything that happens on that farm is my business, Mrs. McAllister." Crane's voice hardened. "As long as you owe me $800, you and your property are very much my concern." Grace felt Nettie's presence behind her, a silent support. "The debt is to the bank, Mr. Crane, not to you personally. And as I recall, I have 60 days to pay it." 53 days now." His smile returned thin and sharp. "Not that I'm counting." "Then I suggest you stop counting and start trusting that I'll meet my obligations." Crane stepped even closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. "I've made you a very generous offer, Grace. May I call you Grace?" "You may not." "Mrs. McAllister, then." He didn't seem fazed. "I'm offering you security, comfort, a life most women in your position would dream of. All you have to do is say yes. And if I say no, then in 53 days you'll have nothing. No home, no livestock, no way to care for those beautiful daughters of yours." His voice dropped intimate and threatening. "A woman alone with 3 children, no money, no property. The courts tend to take a dim view of such situations. Foster families, orphanages, they can be so cold, so impersonal." Grace's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't." "I wouldn't want to." Crane spread his hands. "I'm not a monster, Mrs. McAllister. I'm a businessman, and I'm offering you a perfectly reasonable solution to your problems. But if you choose to complicate matters—" He glanced toward the window where Silas still waited. "Complications can become very unpleasant." For a long moment, Grace couldn't speak. The threat to her children, it was the one weapon Crane knew she couldn't fight. Everything she'd done since Samuel's death, every sleepless night, every back-breaking day of work, had been for Lily and Josie and Emma. The thought of losing them. "Think about it, Mrs. McAllister." Crane tipped his hat, already turning to leave. "I'll come by your farm in a few days to discuss terms. Hopefully by then you'll have come to your senses and sent that drifter on his way." The door closed behind him, and Grace sagged against Nettie's counter, her legs suddenly weak. "That man is the devil himself," Nettie hissed. "Grace, you can't give in to him." "I can't lose my children either. There has to be another way." Grace thought of Caleb sitting in her kitchen offering to help however he could. She thought of his burned hands, his broken leg, the ghosts that haunted his eyes. She thought of Lily's fierce intelligence, Josie's stubborn loyalty, Emma's innocent trust. "There is," she said slowly, "a plan beginning to form. But it's going to take everything I have." She paid for her supplies, loaded them onto her horse, and began the long ride home toward her children, toward Caleb, and toward the fight of her life. Grace pushed her horse harder than she should have on the ride home, the cold wind biting at her cheeks, and Crane's threats echoing in her mind. By the time she reached the farmhouse, the sun was already beginning its descent toward the snow-covered mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that she was too distracted to notice. Lily met her at the door, her young face tight with worry. "Mama, you've been gone so long. We were starting to think, "I'm fine, sweetheart." Grace handed her the supplies and glanced past her into the warmth of the house. "Where's Mr. Thornton?" "In the barn. He insisted on checking on the horses, even with his leg." Lily's voice carried a hint of grudging respect. "Josie's been watching him from the window like a hawk." Grace found Caleb exactly where Lily said, balanced on his crutch in the dim barn, running his hand along the neck of Samuel's old mare. The horse, who had been skittish and difficult since Samuel's death, stood calm and still under his touch. "You shouldn't be out here," Grace said from the doorway. Caleb didn't startle. "Needed to see what we're working with. This mare's got good bones, just needs someone to remind her she's not alone anymore." Something about his words struck Grace harder than they should have. She stepped into the barn, pulling the door closed against the cold. "I spoke with Crane today." Caleb's hand stilled on the horse's neck. He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "And he knows about you, knows you're here." Grace leaned against a support beam, suddenly exhausted. "He called you a drifter, said I was harboring a stranger with no references. He ain't wrong. He threatened my children, Caleb." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble that was growing into a proper beard. "What kind of threat?" "The kind that involves courts and foster homes and taking my girls away from me." Grace's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "He said if I don't marry him, if I don't pay the debt, he'll make sure I lose everything, including them." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he hobbled toward her, his crutch thumping against the packed earth floor until he stood close enough that she could see the fury burning in his brown eyes. "That man won't touch your children, not while I'm breathing. You can barely walk. I won't always be laid up." His voice was low and fierce. "And there's more than one way to fight a bully." What else did he say? Grace told him everything: Crane's demand that she send Caleb away, his promise to visit the farm in a few days, Nettie's warning about the danger he posed. As she spoke, Caleb listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each word. "He's scared," Caleb said finally. "Scared of what?" "Of you. Of losing control." Caleb shifted his weight, grimacing slightly. "Men like Crane, they ain't used to being told no. You refusing him hiring help instead of giving in, it's a threat to everything he thinks he is. That doesn't make him less dangerous." "No, but it means he'll make mistakes." Caleb met her eyes. "We just have to be ready when he does." Grace wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this broken stranger could help her fight the most powerful man in Bitter Creek. But years of hard living had taught her that hope was a luxury she couldn't always afford. "What do we do now?" "Now." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Now we go inside, eat supper with your girls, and let Crane stew for a while. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to come up with $800 in 53 days. It was such a practical answer, so grounded in the simple rhythms of daily survival, that Grace almost laughed. Almost. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be. Nothing worth doing ever is." He gestured toward the barn door with his crutch. "But standing out here in the cold ain't going to solve anything. Your girls are waiting, and I could eat a horse myself." Grace shook her head, but she was almost smiling as she led the way back to the house. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something close. The next few weeks settled into a pattern that felt almost normal if Grace didn't think too hard about the deadline hanging over their heads. Caleb's leg healed faster than expected. Doc Whitfield, who came out to check on him at Nettie's insistence, credited Grace's splinting and the patient's stubborn constitution. "I've seen men laid up for months with breaks like this," the old doctor said, packing away his bag. "You'll be walking without that crutch in another week or two, I'd wager." "I'll hold you to that, Doc," Caleb replied. As his mobility improved, so did his usefulness around the farm. He couldn't do heavy lifting yet, but he could mend harnesses, repair tools, and work with the horses in ways that made Grace's jaw drop. The mare that had been wild with grief after Samuel's death now followed Caleb around the paddock like a love-struck girl. "How do you do that?" Grace asked one morning, watching him gentle a young colt that had been too skittish to saddle. "Do what?" Make them trust you like that. Even Samuel couldn't get that colt to stand still. Caleb stroked the colt's nose, his expression thoughtful. Horses know when you're lying to them. They can feel it in how you hold the reins, hear it in your voice. You can't fake calm with a horse. He glanced at her. People are the same mostly. They just hide it better. Are you calling me a horse, Mr. Thornton? The corner of his mouth twitched. Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am. The girls continued their gradual adjustment to the stranger in their midst. Emma had adopted Caleb completely, insisting on sitting beside him at meals and demanding he tell her stories before bed. Caleb obliged with tales of wild mustangs and mountain men that left the little girl wide-eyed with wonder. Tell me about the horse that could fly, Emma demanded one evening, curled up on the rug by the fire. There ain't no such thing as a flying horse, Emma rose. Then make one up. Caleb looked to Grace for help, but she just shrugged, hiding her smile behind her mending. He sighed and launched into an elaborate story about a magical Mustang named Starfire, who could leap over mountains and outrun the wind itself. By the time he finished, Emma was asleep with her head on his knee, and even Lily was listening from her corner with barely concealed interest. Josie, however, remained stubbornly resistant. She spoke to Caleb only when absolutely necessary, answered his questions with single syllables, and found excuses to leave any room he entered. Grace watched her middle daughter's hostility with growing concern, but every attempt to address it ended in slammed doors and sullen silence. Give her time, Caleb said one night after Josie had stalked off rather than accept his offer to teach her a card game. She's protecting herself the only way she knows how. How long did it take you? What? To stop running from everyone who might matter. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I'll let you know when I figure it out. It was Biscuit who finally began to break through Josie's walls. The scruffy dog had been devoted to Samuel, and after his death, she'd attached herself to Josie with fierce loyalty. But animals, like horses, had their own logic, and Biscuit had decided that Caleb was worthy of her attention too. Your dog keeps following me, Caleb told Josie one afternoon as Biscuit trailed him across the yard. Josie glared at him. She ain't my dog, she's a family dog. Well, your family dog won't stop chewing on my boot. Despite herself, Josie's lips twitched. She does that. Pa used to. She stopped abruptly, the brief crack in her armor sealing over. Just push her away. She'll get bored. But Biscuit didn't get bored. And Caleb wisely never pushed the dog away. He just let her follow him, let Josie watch from a distance, and waited. 2 weeks after Grace's trip to town, Crane made good on his promise to visit. Grace saw the fancy black carriage coming up the snow-packed road and felt her stomach drop. Girls, go to your room. But Mama, Lily started. Now, Lily, take your sisters and stay there until I come get you. Caleb appeared in the doorway of the barn, leaning on his crutch, his eyes fixed on the approaching carriage. You want me to make myself scarce? No. Grace straightened her spine. I want you right where he can see you. Crane descended from the carriage with the help of Silas Drummond, who remained by the vehicle like a silent threat. The banker picked his way across the muddy yard, his expensive boots squelching with each step, his face arranged in an expression of benevolent concern. Mrs. McAllister, how lovely to see you again. Mr. Crane, I wasn't expecting company. I told you I'd come by to discuss our arrangement. His gaze slid past her to where Caleb stood. I see you haven't taken my advice about your house guest. Mr. Thornton is an employee, not a house guest, and your advice wasn't requested. Crane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, my mistake. He turned his full attention to Caleb, studying him with open curiosity. You're the horse trainer, then? Thornton, was it? That's right. Interesting. I've made some inquiries about you, Mr. Thornton, and I've come up empty. No one in 3 counties has heard of you. No previous employers, no family connections, no history at all. Crane tilted his head. Almost as if you appeared from thin air. I move around a lot. So it seems. Crane's voice dropped, turning silky with insinuation. One might wonder what a man's running from to stay so hidden. Caleb's expression didn't change. One might wonder why it's any of your business. For just a moment, anger flashed in Crane's eyes. Then the mask slipped back into place. Everything in this valley is my business, Mr. Thornton. I suggest you remember that. He turned back to Grace, dismissing Caleb as if he no longer existed. Now then, Mrs. McAllister, have you had time to consider my offer? I've considered it. And Grace drew herself up to her full height, acutely aware of Caleb's solid presence behind her. And my answer is the same. I won't marry you, Mr. Crane. Not for any amount of money. Crane's jaw tightened. That's disappointing. I had hoped you'd see reason by now. I see reason perfectly clearly. I see a man who's trying to use my desperation to get what he couldn't earn honestly. Careful, Mrs. McAllister. Crane's voice lost its silky quality, turning hard as flint. You're in no position to insult me. I'm not insulting you. I'm refusing you. There's a difference. For a long moment, Crane just stared at her. Then he laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that made Grace's skin crawl. You have spirit, I'll give you that. Samuel always said you were stubborn. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. But spirit won't save your farm. Spirit won't keep your children fed and clothed when you're living in the streets, and spirit certainly won't protect you when I decide to stop being patient. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Crane stepped back, his public mask sliding into place again. You have 40 days left, Mrs. McAllister. I suggest you use them wisely. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy and returned to his carriage. Silas Drummond held the door for him, his scarred face expressionless as he glanced toward Caleb with something that might have been professional assessment. Grace watched them drive away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She didn't realize she was shaking until Caleb's hand touched her elbow. You did good. Did I? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. He's not going to give up. He'll find a way to hurt us. Probably. But you didn't bow to him. That matters. Grace had turned to face him, really seeing him for the first time. The bruises from his fall had faded, and though he still favored his left leg, there was strength in his stance. His dark eyes held something she hadn't noticed before, a fierce protectiveness that reminded her painfully of Samuel. Why do you care so much, she asked, about what happens to us? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. His hand was still on her elbow, warm even through the layers of wool and cotton. Because I couldn't save my own family, he said finally. And maybe helping yours is the closest I'll ever get to making that right. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was honest in a way that Grace hadn't heard from a man in a very long time. Well, she said, stepping back to break the contact before she did something foolish. I suppose we'd better start figuring out how to come up with $800 in 40 days. Caleb's mouth twitched. I was hoping you wouldn't remember that part. The days that followed were a blur of work and worry. Caleb threw himself into the farm with an intensity that surprised even Grace, working from dawn to dusk despite his healing leg. He fixed the barn roof that had been leaking since autumn. He mended fences that Samuel had left unfinished. He worked with the horses until they responded to commands like soldiers to a general. But money remained the insurmountable problem. The farm's herd had dwindled since Samuel's illness, and what remained wouldn't fetch anywhere near $800, not in winter when prices were at their lowest and buyers were scarce. We could sell the timber rights, Grace suggested one evening, poring over Samuel's old account books by lamplight. To who Crane owns the mill? There are mills in Cheyenne. We could, by the time we transported the lumber and negotiated a price, winter would be over, and Crane would already own this place. Grace slammed the book shut in frustration. Then what? Tell me, Caleb, because I've been over these numbers 100 times. and I don't see a way out." Caleb leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the ceiling. "What about the horses?" "What about them? You've got good breeding stock here. Samuel knew what he was doing when he built this herd." Caleb looked at her. "In the spring, those colts will be worth a fortune to the right buyers. Army contracts, ranch stock, maybe even racing if they're fast enough. Spring is 3 months away. We don't have 3 months." "No. But we might be able to find buyers who will pay now for spring delivery. A contract like the cattle ranchers do." Grace stared at him. "Advance payment on horses that aren't ready yet." "It's not unheard of. Takes the right connections, though." Caleb hesitated. "I might know someone. Man I used to work for in Montana. He supplies horses to the cavalry, and he's always looking for good stock. Montana's 1,000 miles away. Letters travel faster than horses." Caleb met her eyes. "Let me write to him, see what he says. It's a long shot, but it's something." It was more than something. It was the first real hope Grace had felt since Samuel's death. She nodded slowly. "Write your letter. I'll pray for a miracle." But Crane wasn't going to make things easy. Within days of his visit, problems began to multiply. The shipment of grain Grace had ordered from Nettie's store was mysteriously delayed. The blacksmith suddenly couldn't find time to repair her broken plow. When she went to town for supplies, conversation stopped when she entered and started again in whispers when she left. "They're afraid of him." Nettie explained, her own voice low despite them being alone in the store. "Crane's been making it known that anyone who helps you will face consequences. The blacksmith owes money to the bank. Half the farmers in this valley do. So I'm to be shunned, starved out. I'll still trade with you." Nettie's chin lifted. "That man can threaten all he wants. I own this store free and clear, and I'll serve whoever I please." "You could lose customers." "Then I'll lose them. Some things matter more than money, Grace McAllister." Grace hugged the older woman tightly, blinking back tears. "You're a good friend, Nettie. Just remember that when you're rich and famous." Despite Nettie's loyalty, the isolation took its toll. Lily came home from school in tears, saying the other children were calling her mother names she wouldn't repeat. Josie got into a fistfight with a boy who said they'd all end up in the poorhouse. Even Emma sensed the tension becoming clingy and prone to nightmares. "They say bad things about Mama," she whispered to Caleb one night, crawling into his lap without asking permission. "They say she's going to marry the mean man, and we'll have to call him Papa." Caleb's arms tightened around the little girl. "Who told you that?" "Tommy Miller. He said his pa said it." Emma's blue eyes were swimming with tears. "I don't want a new Papa. I want my real Papa back." Grace, watching from the doorway, felt her heart splinter into 1,000 pieces. "Your mama isn't going to marry anyone she doesn't want to," Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm. "And your real Papa, he's always going to be your Papa. Nobody can take that away. Not ever. Promise." "I promise," Emma rose. Later, after the girls were in bed, Grace found Caleb staring into the fire with an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you told her. It was the truth." "I know. That's what made it matter." Caleb turned to look at her, and something in his gaze made Grace's breath catch. In the firelight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes were warmer than they'd been when he first arrived. "Grace," he said, and something in his voice had changed. "There's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "About my past. About why I was traveling alone in winter, why nobody in 3 counties has heard of me." Grace sat down in the chair across from him, her heart beating faster. "You don't have to—" "Yeah, I do." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "If Crane digs deep enough, he'll find it anyway. Better you hear it from me." He took a breath, staring at his scarred hands. "After the fire, after Margaret and William, I went a little crazy. Drinking, fighting, looking for any way to stop the pain. I ended up in an army stockade for striking an officer." Striking. He was drunk, Said something about soldiers' wives being better off dead than waiting for men who'd never come home. Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. I broke his jaw in 3 places. Grace's hand had risen to cover her mouth. What happened? Should have been a court-martial. Prison may be worse. But the war was over by then, and they just wanted troublemakers gone. Gave me a choice: dishonorable discharge or desertion charges, if I ever showed my face on a military post again. So you ran. I didn't see it as running, saw it as starting over. Caleb finally looked at her. But Crane won't see it that way. To him, it's leverage. A way to discredit me, and through me, you. Grace was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this new information. The man before her had done things he wasn't proud of, had been broken by grief and made terrible choices, but who among them hadn't? I don't care about your past, she said finally. I care about who you are now. And who you are now is the only reason my children still have a roof over their heads. Grace. I mean it, Caleb. Whatever Crane digs up, whatever he tries to use against you, it won't change anything. You're part of this family now for as long as you want to be. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than Grace had intended. Caleb's eyes searched her face, looking for something: doubt, pity, fear. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. I used to think family was just blood, he said softly. People you were born to stuck with whether you wanted them or not. But Margaret taught me different. She used to say family was a choice you made every single day. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was the best person I ever knew. Caleb paused. Until I came to this farm. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. She stood abruptly, suddenly needing to put distance between them before she did something she couldn't take back. It's late. I should check on the girls. Grace. She paused at the doorway, not turning around. Whatever happens with Crane, whatever comes next, I want you to know something. His voice was rough, uncertain. I didn't expect to find anything worth staying for. Not ever again. But this place, these girls, you... Don't. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Please, Caleb. Not yet. She fled to the safety of her daughter's room before he could respond, her heart pounding, and her mind racing with possibilities she wasn't ready to face. In the darkness of the bedroom, listening to her daughter's steady breathing, Grace pressed her hand to her chest and tried to sort through the chaos of her emotions. She was still mourning. Samuel, wasn't she? It had only been 8 months. Decent widows waited at least a year before even thinking of another man. But when Caleb looked at her with those brown eyes full of pain and hope, and something else she didn't dare name. God help her. She wanted to stop being decent. Mama? Lily's voice came out of the darkness, startling her. Are you crying? Grace quickly wiped her eyes. No, sweetheart, just thinking. About Mr. Thornton. The question was too knowing for a 12-year-old. Grace sat on the edge of Lily's bed, smoothing her daughter's hair. I'm thinking about a lot of things. The farm, the money we owe, what's going to happen to us. I heard what he said. Lily's voice was quiet but steady. About his family, about why he's helping us. You shouldn't have been eavesdropping. I wasn't. I was getting water, and you were talking. Lily paused. Mama, I think he's a good man. I didn't want to at first, but I think he is. Why do you say that? Because he looks at you the way Pa used to. Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, without a trace of resentment. And because he looks at us like he's scared of loving us, but can't help himself. Out of the mouths of babes, Grace thought her eyes stinging with fresh tears. Whatever happens, Lily, I want you to know something. I will never put a man, any man, before you and your sisters. You will always come first. I know, Mama. Lily reached up to squeeze her mother's hand. But maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you can have both. Grace bent to kiss her daughter's forehead, marveling at the wisdom in that young heart. When did you get so smart? Pa always said I took after you." Grace laughed, despite herself, a wet, choked sound that was half sob. "Go to sleep, sweetheart. We've got a lot of work tomorrow." But long after Lily's breathing had evened into sleep, Grace lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about choices, about family, about the stubborn, damaged, impossibly kind man sleeping in the room down the hall who had ridden into her life on the edge of a blizzard and somehow become essential without her permission. 35 days until Crane's deadline, and Grace still had no idea how they were going to survive it. The letter from Montana arrived on a Tuesday 3 weeks before Crane's deadline. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the cramped handwriting, while Grace watched from across the kitchen table. "Well?" she asked, unable to bear the silence. Caleb looked up, and for the first time since she'd known him, his face split into a genuine smile. "He's interested. Marcus Wheeler, my old employer. He wants to see the horses personally, but if they're as good as I described, he's willing to pay $400 now and another $400 on spring delivery." $800. Grace sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. "That's exactly what we owe." "There's a catch." Caleb's smile faded slightly. "He wants to inspect the stock himself before he commits. He's coming in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? That's cutting it close. Too close." Caleb set the letter down. "If anything goes wrong, if he doesn't like what he sees, if the deal falls through, we'll have no time to find another buyer." Grace stared at the letter as if it might bite her. 2 weeks of hoping, of preparing, of praying that this one chance would save everything. 2 weeks for Crane to discover their plan and find a way to destroy it. "We can't let Crane know," she said. "If he finds out we have a buyer coming, he'll do everything in his power to stop it." Caleb nodded grimly. "We keep this quiet. Tell no one except maybe Nettie, and only because we'll need supplies for Wheeler's visit." "What about the girls?" "Emma can't keep a secret to save her life. Lily might understand, but it's safer if they don't know." Caleb reached across the table and covered Grace's hand with his own. "We can do this, Grace. We're so close." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him since that night by the fire, and the contact sent a jolt through her chest. "I believe you," she said. And the terrifying thing was, she meant it. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Caleb worked with the horses until they gleamed, their coats brushed to a shine, their movements crisp and obedient. Grace threw herself into cleaning and organizing, determined that when Marcus Wheeler arrived, he would see a farm worth investing in, not a widow's desperate last stand. The girls sensed the change in atmosphere, even without knowing the cause. Lily became quieter, more watchful. Emma seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy, asking endless questions about why Mama and Mr. Caleb were so busy. Even Josie's hostility had softened into something closer to wary acceptance, though she still refused to speak to Caleb directly. It was Josie who first noticed something was wrong. "Mama." She appeared in the kitchen doorway one evening, her face pale. "There's men watching the farm." Grace's blood went cold. "What do you mean, watching?" "I saw them from my window. 2 men on horses up on the ridge. They've been there for an hour." Caleb was already reaching for his coat. "Stay inside, all of you." "Caleb, wait." Grace grabbed his arm. "If it's Crane's men, then I need to know what they're planning." His eyes met hers, steady and determined. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." He was gone before she could argue, disappearing into the darkness with a speed that belied his still healing leg. Grace gathered her daughters in the kitchen, lit every lamp in the house, and waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Emma fell asleep with her head in Grace's lap, and Lily dozed fitfully in her chair. Only Josie remained alert, her brown eyes fixed on the window, biscuit pressed against her legs. "He'll come back," Grace said, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Josie or herself. "I know." Josie's voice was barely a whisper. I don't want him to get hurt." It was the most she'd said about Caleb since his arrival. Grace reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Neither do I, sweetheart. Neither do I." When Caleb finally returned, his face was grim. "Crane's men, Silas Drummond and 2 others. They rode off when they saw me coming, but they'll be back." "What does he want?" "He's watching, waiting for us to make a mistake." Caleb hung up his coat, his movements stiff with cold intention. "He knows something's changed. We've been too busy, too hopeful. He can smell it. What do? We stay vigilant, and we pray Wheeler gets here before Crane figures out our plan." But Crane was already closer to the truth than they knew. 3 days before Wheeler was due to arrive, Grace returned from a quick trip to Nettie's store to find Caleb standing in the yard, his fists clenched at his sides, staring at something she couldn't see from the road. "Caleb, what is it?" He didn't answer, just pointed toward the barn. Someone had painted words across the wooden doors in red paint that looked sickeningly like blood. "Leave now, or burn." Grace's knees nearly buckled. "Who, when?" "Must have happened while you were in town. I was working the horses in the back pasture." Caleb's voice was tight with fury. "I didn't see anyone. The girls inside. They haven't seen this yet." Grace stared at the ugly words, her mind racing. Burn. The threat was unmistakable, and after what Caleb had told her about his past, about Margaret and William, it was cruelly specific. "This is meant for you as much as me," she said quietly. "He knows about the fire, about your family." Caleb's jaw worked. "He's been digging, found something." "Caleb," Grace touched his arm. "Maybe you should go, before Wheeler arrives, before Crane can use this against—" "No." The word was fierce, final. "I'm not running again. Not from him. Not from this. He'll destroy you." "He can try." Caleb turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "I've lost everything before, Grace. My wife, my son, my honor. I survived it because I didn't have anything left worth fighting for. But now, I do." "Caleb, I'm not asking for anything. I know you're still grieving, still figuring out what comes next, but I need you to understand." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the winter cold. "I would rather die defending this farm, defending you and those girls, than spend another day running from my own shadow." Grace felt tears burning in her eyes. She wanted to tell him not to be foolish, not to throw his life away for a widow and 3 children who weren't even his family. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. "You stubborn, impossible man," she whispered. "Takes one to know one, ma'am." And then, before she could talk herself out of it, Grace rose on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it changed everything. When she pulled back, Caleb's eyes were wide with surprise, and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "Well," he said, his voice rough, That's something. Don't let it go to your head." But Grace was smiling through her tears. "Now help me clean off this door before the girls see it." They scrubbed the paint away together, working in companionable silence, as the sun sank toward the mountains. By the time they finished, the words were gone, but the threat they represented lingered in the air like smoke. That night, Caleb insisted on sleeping in the barn despite Grace's protests. "If they come back, I want to be ready," he said, checking the chamber of the old revolver he'd brought with him from Montana. "The horses are too valuable to leave unguarded." "And what about you? You're valuable too." Caleb's mouth quirked. "Didn't know you cared, Mrs. McAllister." "Don't push your luck, Mr. Thornton." But she brought him extra blankets and a thermos of hot coffee, and when their hands touched during the exchange, neither of them pulled away. The night passed without incident, and the next. Grace began to hope that Crane's threat had been just that, a threat designed to frighten them into submission. 2 more days until Wheeler arrived. 2 more days until their chance at salvation. On the night before Wheeler was due, Grace woke to the sound of Biscuit barking frantically. She was out of bed before she was fully awake, her feet hitting the cold floor as she reached for the lamp. Through the window, she could see an orange glow that had no business being there at 3 in the morning. Fire. The barn was on fire. Girls, wake up. Get outside now. Grace flew down the stairs, throwing open the front door just as Lily appeared on the landing, her face pale with fear. Take your sisters out the back. Go to the Wilsons' farm. Don't stop for anything. Mama, the barn. Go, Lily, now. Grace didn't wait to see if her daughter obeyed. She was already running across the yard, the snow crunching under her bare feet, her nightgown whipping in the wind. The barn was fully engulfed on one side, flames licking up the walls and reaching for the roof. Caleb, Caleb! She heard the horses screaming before she heard his voice. High, terrified sounds that cut through the roar of the flames. Then Caleb burst through the barn doors, leading 2 horses by their halters, his face black with soot and his shirt smoking. Get back, he shouted, pushing past her. The hay's caught, the whole thing's going to go. The other horses. I'm going back for them. No. Grace grabbed his arm. It's too dangerous. But Caleb was already shaking her off, plunging back into the inferno. Grace watched in horror as the flames swallowed him, her heart stopping in her chest. 1 second. 2. 5. A crash as part of the roof collapsed. And then Caleb emerged again, pulling 2 more horses behind him, their eyes rolling with terror. He was coughing, stumbling, his left arm hanging at an odd angle. That's all of them, he gasped, falling to his knees in the snow. That's all. Caleb. Grace dropped beside him, her hands flying over his body, checking for injuries. His arm was badly burned, the skin already blistering. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. But he was alive. He was alive. The horses, he mumbled. Wheeler needs to see. Hush, don't talk. The barn groaned and collapsed in on itself, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Grace pulled Caleb away from the heat, dragging him toward the house as neighbors began to appear, drawn by the glow visible for miles. Dr. Whitfield arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand, and his face grim. By then, Caleb was unconscious, his body finally surrendering to shock and pain. Grace sat beside him, holding his uninjured hand, refusing to leave, even when Nettie tried to guide her away. He's going to need care, the doctor said, wrapping Caleb's burned arm in clean bandages. Weeks of rest, maybe longer. That arm, if infection sets in. It won't. Grace's voice was steel. I'll make sure of it. Grace. Nettie knelt beside her, her weathered face creased with worry. The girls are safe at my place. Lily got them there, just like you said. Thank God. But honey, the barn, the horses. Without the barn, without somewhere to keep the livestock. I know. Grace looked at the man lying in her spare bedroom, the man who had nearly died saving animals that weren't even his. I know what this means. It meant their plan was ruined. Wheeler couldn't buy horses that had no shelter, no proper facilities. Even if he still came, even if the horses themselves were unharmed, no serious buyer would invest in a farm that was falling apart. Crane had won. When Caleb woke the next morning, the first word out of his mouth was her name. Grace, Grace, the horses. They're fine, all 4 of them safe and sound. She squeezed his hand. You saved them. The barn? Gone, completely destroyed. Caleb closed his eyes, his face contorting with grief and frustration. Wheeler, when he comes, he'll see a burned-out shell and a farm in ruins. Grace's voice was calm despite the tears sliding down her cheeks. It's over, Caleb. We lost. No. Caleb struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. There has to be something. There isn't. Grace gently pushed him back down. Crane made sure of that. He didn't just threaten us, he destroyed our only chance. How do you know it was Crane? Who else? The timing, the threat on the barn? Grace shook her head. It doesn't matter now. What matters is getting you well and figuring out where we go from here. Where you go is away from this place. Caleb's voice was bitter. Away from me. I brought this on you, Grace. If I hadn't been here, if Crane hadn't been trying to drive me off. Stop it. The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Victor Crane was going to take this farm, whether you were here or not. The only difference you made was giving me someone to fight beside. Don't you dare take that away from me now. Caleb stared at her, his brown eyes bright with pain and something else, something that looked like love. Grace McAllister, you are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. And you're the most stubborn man. We're well matched. Despite everything, the burned barn, the ruined plan, the impossible deadline, Caleb's mouth curved into a ghost of a smile. I reckon we are. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion and despair. Grace moved through her chores mechanically, her mind churning with impossible calculations. 15 days until Crane's deadline. No barn, no buyer, no hope. Wheeler sent word that he'd heard about the fire and was postponing his visit indefinitely. The letter was polite, but the message was clear. He wasn't interested in a farm that couldn't even protect its own livestock. Crane, to his credit, waited 3 full days before paying a visit. Grace saw his carriage coming and felt nothing but a cold, distant rage. She met him in the yard, refusing to let him enter the house where Caleb was still recovering. Mrs. McAllister. Crane surveyed the ruins of the barn with poorly concealed satisfaction. I heard about your misfortune. Such a tragedy. Is it? I beg your pardon. You heard me. Grace stepped closer, her eyes blazing. We both know you're responsible for this. You or your men. Crane's expression didn't flicker. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I was in Cheyenne on business when the fire occurred. Dozens of witnesses can attest to my whereabouts. But Silas Drummond wasn't in Cheyenne, was he? Mr. Drummond's activities are his own affair. Crane's smile widened. I'm simply here to express my condolences and to remind you that the deadline for your loan is fast approaching. I'm aware. 14 days, Mrs. McAllister. Less than 2 weeks. Crane spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. I hate to see a family in such dire straits. A woman alone with 3 young daughters about to lose everything. Get to the point. My offer still stands. Crane stepped closer, lowering his voice. Marry me, and all of this goes away. The debt, the threats, the uncertainty. I'll rebuild your barn, expand your herd, give those girls the life they deserve. All you have to do is say yes. Grace looked at this man, this monster who had threatened her children, destroyed her livelihood, and nearly killed the man she was beginning to love, and felt something shift inside her. She was done being afraid. No. Crane blinked. I'm sorry. I said no. I won't marry you, Victor Crane. Not today, not in 14 days, not ever. Grace's voice rang out across the yard, strong and clear. You can take my farm, take my livestock, take everything I own. But you will never take my dignity or my freedom. You're making a terrible mistake. No. I'm making the only choice I can live with. Grace stepped back, putting distance between them. Now get off my property before I fetch my rifle. Crane's face twisted with rage, all pretense of civility gone. You think you've won something here. You've won nothing. In 2 weeks, you'll be homeless, penniless, and your precious daughters will be wards of the state. I'll see to it personally. Then I'll fight you in court. I'll tell everyone what you've done, the threats, the fire, all of it. Who would believe you, a desperate widow against the most respected businessmen in the territory? Crane laughed. You have no proof, no allies, no. She has me. They both turned to see Caleb standing in the doorway of the house, his burned arm in a sling, his face pale but determined. He shouldn't have been out of bed, but there he was, every inch the cowboy who had ridden into Grace's life 3 months ago. "Mr. Thornton." Crane's lip curled. "Still here, I see, despite the clear message we sent." "Your message was received." Caleb limped forward until he stood beside Grace. "And here's mine if you come near this family again, if you threaten these children or this woman, I will end you. Bank or no bank, courts or no courts, I will find a way." Brave words from a man who can barely stand. "I stood well enough to save those horses, the ones you tried to burn alive." Caleb's voice was soft, deadly. "And I'll stand well enough to watch you hang when the truth comes out." Something flickered in Crane's eyes, the first hint of uncertainty Grace had seen. "You have nothing on me." "Not yet, but fires leave evidence. Witnesses have a way of developing guilty consciences, and the cavalry has a long memory for the men who sell them bad stock, like the horses you switched out during that army contract 3 years ago." Crane's face went pale. "How do you—" "Marcus Wheeler talks when he drinks, and he drinks a lot." Caleb smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Go ahead, Crane. Take your pound of flesh. Take this farm and everything in it. But know that I will spend every day of my life making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Crane turned on his heel and stalked back to his carriage. His perfect composure finally cracked. "This isn't over," he called as Silas helped him up. "You'll regret this." "Maybe." Caleb put his good arm around Grace's shoulders. "But I doubt it." They watched the carriage disappear down the road, neither speaking until it was out of sight. Then Grace turned to Caleb, her eyes wide. "Was any of that true about the army contract?" "Some of it. Wheeler did mention Crane tried to cheat the cavalry once." Caleb's mouth twitched. "I may have embellished the details." "You were bluffing. Poker's a useful skill out here." Grace stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter, wild, slightly hysterical laughter that she couldn't seem to control. Caleb watched her with concern until the laughter turned to tears, and then he simply held her, his good arm wrapped around her shoulders, while she sobbed against his chest. "What do we do now?" she asked, when she could finally speak again. "He's right. We have no money, no proof, no way to fight him." "We'll figure something out." Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "We always do." But even as he said it, Grace could hear the doubt in his voice. 2 weeks. No barn, no buyer, no miracle on the horizon. And Victor Crane, nursing his wounded pride, plotting his revenge. The days after Crane's departure were the quietest Grace had ever known. No threats, no visits, no watchers on the ridge. Just an eerie stillness that felt more ominous than any open hostility. "He's planning something," Caleb said on the third morning, standing at the window with his coffee growing cold in his hand. "Man like that doesn't just walk away from a fight." "Maybe your bluff scared him more than we thought." "Maybe." But Caleb didn't sound convinced. Grace was washing the breakfast dishes when she heard hoofbeats approaching, her hand stilled in the soapy water, her heart climbing into her throat. But when she looked out the window, it wasn't Crane's fancy carriage coming up the road. It was Nettie Hawkins driving her old buckboard at a pace that couldn't be good for the ancient mule pulling it. Grace dried her hands and met Nettie at the door. The older woman's face was flushed with excitement, her silver hair escaping from its usual neat bun. "You need to come to town," Nettie said before Grace could speak. "Right now, both of you." "What's happened?" "Just come. Trust me, Grace. This is something you need to see for yourself." Grace and Caleb exchanged a look. Whatever this was, Nettie wouldn't have driven all the way out here if it wasn't important. "The girls," Grace started. "Bring them. Bring everyone. The whole town's gathering at the church and you need to be there." The ride into Bitter Creek felt endless despite Nettie's mule maintaining a surprisingly brisk pace. Caleb sat beside Grace in the buckboard, his injured arm still in its sling, his good hand resting protectively on her knee. In the back, the girls huddled together under a blanket, Emma chattering nervously, while Lily and Josie remained silent. When they reached the church, Grace understood why Nettie had insisted they come. The small building was surrounded by wagons and horses, and people were streaming through the doors in numbers she hadn't seen since the Christmas service. What on earth? Come on. Nettie helped them down from the buckboard. Reverend Shaw's been waiting for you. Inside, the church was packed. Grace recognized nearly every face: farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, people she'd known for years, but who had avoided her ever since Crane began his campaign of isolation. And now they were all looking at her with expressions that ranged from guilty to defiant to something that looked almost like hope. Reverend Thomas Shaw stood at the front of the church, his weathered face grave. Beside him stood a man Grace didn't recognize, younger, sharply dressed with the look of a lawyer or a government man. Mrs. McAllister. The Reverend's voice carried through the hushed crowd. Thank you for coming. Please come forward. Grace felt Caleb's hand at the small of her back steadying her as she walked down the narrow aisle. The girls followed close behind Emma, clutching Lily's hand, Josie's face set in its familiar expression of wary distrust. What is this about Reverend? This gentleman is Mr. Harold Finch from the Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne. Reverend Shaw gestured to the stranger. He arrived yesterday with some very interesting news about our local banker. Mr. Finch stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral. Mrs. McAllister, I'm here because of a complaint filed against Victor Crane by Marcus Wheeler of Wheeler Horse Trading in Montana. Grace's heart stuttered. Marcus Wheeler, but I thought he canceled his visit to your farm? Yes, but not because of the fire. Finch's mouth thinned. Mr. Wheeler received a telegram 3 days before your barn burned warning him that if he did business with you, he'd never work in Wyoming territory again. The telegram was traced back to Mr. Crane's office. That's illegal, Caleb said, his voice sharp. Interference with interstate commerce. Indeed, it is, Mr. Thornton, and it's not the only illegal activity we've uncovered. Finch pulled a sheaf of papers from his case. Mr. Wheeler was motivated to share some concerns he'd had about Mr. Crane for some time, specifically about certain irregularities in Army horse contracts that Mr. Crane facilitated 2 years ago. Grace remembered Caleb's bluff during the confrontation with Crane. He'd mentioned those contracts, thrown them out as a threat, but he'd been guessing, playing poker with nothing in his hand. Or had he? I did some digging after I sent that letter, Caleb admitted quietly, seeing Grace's expression. Wrote to a few people I knew from my Army days. Turns out, Wheeler wasn't the only one who had suspicions. Finch nodded. Mr. Thornton's inquiries reached the right ears at the right time. The Territorial Marshal's office has been investigating Mr. Crane for months, but we lacked sufficient evidence to act. Until now. What kind of evidence? Grace asked. Bank fraud for one. Mr. Crane has been manipulating loan terms and property valuations to force farmers off their land. Finch's gaze swept the crowded church. Several of you have come forward in the past 24 hours with stories remarkably similar to Mrs. McAllister's suspicious illnesses, mysterious fires, threats against family members. A murmur ran through the congregation. Grace looked around and saw faces she hadn't expected: the blacksmith who'd refused to repair her plow, the grain merchant who'd delayed her orders. They weren't meeting her eyes now, but they were here. They'd come forward. Why now? Grace heard herself ask. Why are you all speaking up now when you wouldn't before? It was old Henry Peterson, a cattle rancher whose spread bordered the McAllister farm, who answered. He rose from his pew, his hat clutched in his work-roughened hands. Because we were scared, Mrs. McAllister. Crane had us all under his thumb one way or another. Most of us owe money to that bank. We were afraid if we spoke up, we'd end up just like you threatened, isolated, burned out. Henry's voice cracked. But when we heard what he did to your barn, when we heard how you stood up to him anyway, we realized we'd been cowards. Another voice chimed in. It was Sarah Miller, whose husband ran the feed store. My Tommy came home from school crying because of what the other children were saying about your girls. And I knew it was because of the lies Crane was spreading. But I didn't do anything. I was too scared. So we started talking, said a third voice, the blacksmith Jonas Ward, his massive shoulders hunched with shame. After church last Sunday, a group of us stayed behind. We compared stories and we realized we weren't alone. Crane's been doing this to families all across the valley for years. And then Mr. Finch arrived, Reverend Shaw continued, and we knew it was time. Time to stop being afraid. Time to stand together. Grace felt tears burning in her eyes. For months, she'd felt so alone, so abandoned by the community she'd called home for years. And now here they were, filling this church, finally willing to fight. What happens now? Caleb asked, his arm tightening around Grace's shoulders. Now we build a case. Finch tucked his papers back into his case. Mr. Crane has been arrested and is being held in Cheyenne pending trial. His assets, including the bank, have been frozen by territorial order. Frozen. Grace's head spun. But the loan, the deadline, no longer applies, Mrs. McAllister. Any loans issued under fraudulent terms are suspended until a full accounting can be completed. You won't lose your farm. Not to Crane, not to anyone. Grace's legs gave out. If Caleb hadn't been there to catch her, she would have collapsed right there in the church aisle. The girls rushed forward, even Josie, her usual reserve forgotten in the moment. Mama! Emma wrapped her small arms around Grace's waist. Mama, are you okay? I'm okay, baby. Grace was laughing and crying at the same time, clutching her daughters with one hand and Caleb's shirt with the other. I'm better than okay. We're going to be fine. We're going to be just fine. The rest of that day passed in a blur of conversations, handshakes, and more tears than Grace had shed in the previous 8 months combined. Person after person approached her with apologies, with offers of help, with stories of their own experiences with Crane's manipulation. Jonas Ward offered to rebuild her barn free of charge with help from the other men in town. Sarah Miller pressed a basket of food into her hands, along with a tearful promise that the children would stop their cruel taunting. Even Judge Phillips's wife stopped by, her face pale with shame, to whisper that her husband had been Crane's puppet for years and was cooperating fully with the investigation. Through it all, Caleb stayed by her side, a steady, solid presence that Grace had come to rely on more than she'd ever expected to rely on anyone again. It was late afternoon when they finally returned to the farm, exhausted but lighter than they'd been in months. The burned-out shell of the barn no longer seemed like a monument to defeat. Now it was just a structure that needed rebuilding, and they had an entire community offering to help. I still can't believe it, Grace said as they pulled up to the house. All those people, all those stories, and Crane's been doing this for years without anyone stopping him. Fear's a powerful thing. Caleb helped her down from the buckboard, his hand lingering on her waist. It takes a lot of courage to stand up to a man who controls your livelihood. They only did it because we stood up first. No. Caleb's eyes were warm as he looked at her. They did it because you stood up first. I was just along for the ride. Don't be modest, Caleb Thornton. It doesn't suit you. He laughed, a real laugh, the first she'd heard from him, and the sound made Grace's heart swell with a joy she'd almost forgotten was possible. The girls scrambled out of the buckboard and raced toward the house, eager to share the news with no one, Grace supposed. Old habits died hard. Mama, Lily called from the porch. There's someone here. Grace's smile faded. She exchanged a worried look with Caleb, but when they rounded the corner of the house, they found not a threat, but a miracle. Marcus Wheeler sat on the porch steps, his long legs stretched out before him, looking for all the world like a man who had nowhere else to be. Mr. Wheeler, Caleb's voice was thick with surprise. I thought you'd written us off. Nearly did. Wheeler rose, brushing off his trousers. Then I got a very interesting visit from a territorial marshal asking questions about Victor Crane. That's when I realized I'd been played, and that I'd almost let a good deal slip through my fingers because of it. You came all the way from Montana. Took the train to Cheyenne, then rode the rest of the way. Wheeler's gaze swept the property lingering on the burned barn. I see Crane made his displeasure known. You could say that. Well, Wheeler turned back to Caleb with a grin. Good thing I brought a few of my men along. They're fair hands with a hammer, and I figure the least I can do is help you rebuild what my cowardice helped destroy. Grace stepped forward, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Mr. Wheeler, are you saying? I'm saying I still want those horses, Mrs. McAllister, assuming they're as good as Thornton promised. Wheeler's expression softened as he looked at her. I'm also saying that a woman who can stand up to a man like Victor Crane is the kind of business partner I want on my side. So here's my offer, not just this one sale, but an ongoing arrangement. You raise the horses, I buy them and sell them to the cavalry. 50-50 split on the profits. 50-50? Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mr. Wheeler, that's incredibly generous. It's good business. Your husband had an eye for horseflesh, and from what I can see, so do you. And Thornton here. Wheeler clapped Caleb on the shoulder, making him wince from the impact on his injured arm. Thornton's the best trainer I've ever seen. I tried to hire him away from your farm, but he wouldn't budge. Said he had obligations. Grace looked at Caleb, who was suddenly very interested in his boots. Did he now? Wouldn't hear of leaving. Very loyal, this one. Wheeler's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. Can't imagine why. The evening that followed was the most joyful the McAllister farm had seen since Samuel's death. Wheeler's men, 4 sturdy ranch hands who'd ridden with him from Montana, set up camp near the burned barn, already making plans for the rebuild. Wheeler himself stayed for supper, regaling the girls with stories of wild horse chases and narrow escapes that left Emma breathless with excitement, and Lily pressing for practical details. Even Josie seemed to thaw slightly, asking Wheeler about the different breeds of cavalry horses, and listening intently to his answers. Grace noticed that she'd positioned herself closer to Caleb than usual, not touching him, but no longer keeping her careful distance. After the girls were in bed and Wheeler had retired to his tent, Grace and Caleb sat on the porch in their usual spot, watching the stars emerge in the winter sky. The relief of the day was finally settling in, leaving Grace feeling wrung out, but at peace. I keep expecting to wake up, she admitted, to find out this was all a dream. It's real. Caleb reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Grace, I need to tell you something. What is it? He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When I came here, when I fell off my horse and you found me in the snow, I wasn't just drifting, I was running. I know. You told me about the army, about... Not just that. Caleb's voice was rough. I was running from myself. From the guilt of surviving when Margaret and William didn't. I'd convinced myself that I didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve